My friend Jill has created shoes I wish I had when my kids were littles. Kiss and Toe shoes are not only stylish and practical, but each pair is designed to help your kids put their shoe on the right foot all by themselves. All they have to do is make sure the adorable woodland foxes embroidered on each shoe are kissing when the shoes meet. These shoes save time, they teach independence, and they cultivate self-confidence in kids. Not only that, but with every pair sold, Kiss and Toes donates a portion of their proceeds to support families who are in the process of adoption. This is a product and a company that Hey Girl is honored to support. From now until Christmas Day, you can get 15% off your purchase from Kiss and Toes by using the promo code HeyGirlPod at checkout. 15% off, y'all. That is the biggest discount they've offered since their launch. So what are you waiting for? Go to kissandtoes.com. That's KISSINTOES.com. Kissandtoes.com. Make sure you use the promo code HeyGirlPod. Get your 15% off. Go order some of these adorable shoes. Shoes for your neighbors, shoes for your nieces and nephews, shoes for all of the kids. And don't forget to use the promo code HeyGirlPod and get your 15% off. Hey girls, and welcome to season 4 of the Hey Girl podcast. I'm your host, Bethany Needham. This season, we get to hear stories of faithfulness from stay-at-home mamas, business entrepreneurs, some amazing single ladies, your dearest friends, and your favorite authors. We hope these stories will continue to encourage you to run your race in your place. For more information and to connect with us, go find us on Instagram and Facebook. We're at HeyGirlPod, or you can join our email list through my website, BethanyNeedham.com. As always, thanks for listening. If it weren't for you, I would literally be a crazy person talking to myself in a microphone. But thanks to your listening and sharing this podcast, I get to be a crazy person talking to you through a microphone. So grab a cup of coffee or a cold can of seltzer and let's get this episode started. Hey girl, welcome to another week of the Hey Girl podcast. This week, I get to introduce you to Amanda Brown. I want to say that she's a nominated guest, though I guess technically she's not, but one of my team members, Christine Rigo, technically nominated her because she came to me and was like, I have somebody I think that we should interview. And so we played a little email tag, whatever, but we were finally able to nail it down. I'm so glad we were because it was such a gift to sit down, talk to Amanda, hear more about her story. I just have really enjoyed all of the women that I'm getting to meet through these interviews that are just in places that I'm like, other than the podcast, I don't know if I'd ever get the chance to sit down and hear these stories. And so I hope this story is as much of an encouragement and blessing to you as it was to me. Before we get to it real quick, I want to give a shout out. Hopped over to Facebook and just wanted to share a review. Thank you again for those of you who take the time to do this. It means so much to us. But Sarah Warren, today's your day, girl. Thank you for leaving this review. Sarah said, love this podcast, real women and real walks with God. She's so encouraging and the variety of guests speaks to many different areas of life. Seriously, Sarah, so appreciate you taking the time, leaving these encouraging words. And I love that you're appreciating this variety of guests, especially, honestly, like every season, but every single season when I think, I don't know that it can get better than this, it just keeps blowing my mind. And the guests this season, I have absolutely loved just the variety of stories. So I'm glad you're enjoying it too, Sarah. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And thank you for leaving a review. So as always, if you haven't left one yet, what are you waiting for? It might be yours that I'm reading next week. You never know. All right, without further ado, I cannot wait to introduce you to this week's guest, Amanda Brown. Okay, listeners, we are back another week, another story, and I'm excited because this week's guest, Amanda, I feel like this has been the tag team game. Actually, since like last season, and life and everything that happens, it's kind of been like we knew we were going to do this, but different things have kind of postponed it. But here we are, finally doing it.
I know, long time coming.
But your computer tried to throw a wrench in it by just crashing on you there. But you got your phone, your earbuds. We're going to rock this one way or the other.
I like it.
So for those who may not know who you are, why don't you just take a few moments and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name is Amanda Brown, and I live in Austin, Texas. I grew up in Waco before Waco was cool. Now it's like a vacation hotspot, which is so totally weird. But I've lived in Austin for about 17 years now, and married to my husband, Doug, for going on 11 years. We have 3 boys, 9, 7, and 4. I'm a stay-at-home mom, but I have some kind of odd part-time jobs that I do from home and serve at our church, the Austin Stone Community Church. I'm a teacher at our church. I do some event planning on the side. I do quilting for fun.
What? So you got a side hustle.
I do. I have a few side hustles. Yeah, I got to keep busy. I'm an Enneagram 3. Do you know your Enneagram number?
Oh, yes.
What are you?
First, I would love for you to guess.
Oh, man, I just met you. How am I supposed to know?
I'm just kidding. You don't have to guess. I'm totally I'm a 7, wing 7.
Okay. Yeah.
I live in that world.
You live in the 7s. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
I'm a big fan. I just actually built this season. We're going to have a Hey Girl team for the first time. And one of the things that it helped me in terms of building the team was actually the Enneagram, because I was like, okay,
really good.
So if I'm bringing the 7, then we need like all these different areas. So I have an 8 on the team, which the other day I literally was like, girl, she said something like in our Boxer message. And I was like, you saying that is just a reminder to me of like, I need you in my life. Hey, let's make a list.
That's so good.
Let's figure out.
I love it.
I can dream all day, but you need those people who can kind of drive it. So I love that.
So good.
Enneagram 3. So one of your side hustles is how your name came to me, which is my girl, Christine, who helps some with booking and things like that. Mm-hmm. She actually booked Jamie Ivey, I think last season or the season before. Mm-hmm. And when she was doing that, because I've listened to the Happy Hour podcast, she came back to me. She's like, I know this is going to sound weird. She's like, but Amanda, who like does a lot of kind of what I do for Hey Girl, she's like, I just feel like she'd be a really good interview. And I was like, absolutely, like reach out, see if she'll do it. I think that would be awesome. I'm a huge fan of Christine. And I just think those people, usually the 3s or the 8s or whoever, the get it done people have some of the best stories. And sometimes they're not necessarily on the platform. So you don't always get to hear the story. So
thank you. Thanks, Christine.
Shout out, Christine.
Yeah.
Yes. We've joked many times that when we were like getting ready to book you, I'd be like, oh, you're like my Amanda Brown, my Christine Rigo.
I love that.
Well, very cool. Well, let's take some time and kind of hear a little bit. I love that you grew up in Waco before it was cool. I've only been to Waco since, obviously, since Magnolia entered the scene.
Okay, so you have done it.
I have done it.
New England.
Absolutely. I have a brother that lives in Fort Worth, Texas. So when I visited him, I was like, we have to go to Magnolia. That's like,
okay. Did it meet expectations?
Oh, I loved it. Okay, here's where I stand. This is going to go totally. And I've said this to people who've gone. I love Magnolia. I'm glad that I went, like to see it, whatever.
Yeah.
My favorite parts were actually, is it Harp Company? The guy who
Uh-huh.
does like her, I
Yeah.
actually love his little shop, which is like,
Oh, you went there. I've never been there.
oh, everything in that shop. I was like, I just want to bring all of this home right
Cool.
now.
Okay.
I found the main shop a little, it was also super crowded, which is
Yeah.
not typically my jam,
Yeah.
but it was worth every second to eat the cupcakes from the
Mm,
bakery.
okay.
To this day, when I dream of going to Magnolia, the cupcakes are like in the front of my
You can still
mind.
taste
Oh
them.
my goodness. I'm all about
That's
those
a gift.
cupcakes.
Yeah.
So it was the one thing that caught me off guard was the cost of things. Cause I was like, I'm going to go and get a souvenir. And literally it was like, or a sticker. I could do a
Yeah,
sticker.
maybe just a sticker will be
Yeah.
fine. Yeah.
It's like, this is because my husband was like, this is so dangerous sending you there. And they like ship things to your home if you want.
Oh god, yeah.
And
Yeah. Trouble.
I was like, babe, I don't have the bank account for this to be tempting. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, those things are pretty. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So I have a really nice Magnolia sticker.
Good. Good. On a water bottle, maybe?
Yeah. Actually on the back of this laptop. So
Oh, good.
it
Good.
reminds me of that. So
Awesome.
back in your early years, tell me, I'd love to hear a little bit just of your faith journey. When did your relationship with Jesus start? What did that look like?
Yeah, I would say I was saved. I started following Jesus as a young kid, about 7 years old. I was baptized when I was 7. But that said, in Waco, in Texas, in particularly that area, it's very culturally normal to be a Christian. And so I would say that, as a 7 year old, and probably with most 7 year olds across the country, maybe not across the world, but across the country, I would say to follow Jesus as a 7 year old, it doesn't cost you much.
Mm,
It's relative, but there was no like real costly obedience as a 7 year old. And so it was all very comfortable and normal to be a Christian. I went to Baylor in Waco, where it's also still very comfortable to be a Christian in college, and where it started to be just different for me. And I think an opportunity for me to really own my faith, and really test those waters of is this really something God did in my individual heart versus, my community's hearts. Was when I was a senior in college, I studied abroad in Australia. It was my first time out of the country and my first time outside of the Bible Belt. And it was in Australia not cool to be a Christian. And so it's really my first time to come face to face with if this was a life that I wanted, a life that I felt called to, where it started to cost me more. It started to cost approval and comfort. And so I would say that's probably the time that my life started to really turn, that I realized that it wasn't just a, one-time decision. It wasn't just a lifestyle so much, but it was God was calling me into an intimate relationship with him that was going to cost me something. Moving back home to Waco and then ultimately to Austin, I would say looking back, I think that's the time that kind of started to turn things for me, and God kind of slowly wooing me into a real relationship, versus just like I would call it a covenant versus a contract. It wasn't just me signing up for something, but it was an actual relationship. And
oh, I
um,
like that. Covenant versus contract. It always amazes me when I talk to people from other areas of the country because I was born in New England. And even though we
yeah,
moved some as a kid, most of my experiences are from this area of the country. And what you're describing from Australia, I can relate way stronger to than Texas
totally. Yeah,
because
I'm sure.
this is so not a place where being a Christian is a popular decision
Yeah,
at all. In fact,
yeah,
we just recently moved and I love this little neighborhood that we moved into. But one of the things that we've really prayed about is, okay, God, what is this ministry? Because I just think about down south, oftentimes you move and it's not, will there be Christians in your neighborhood? It's like, how many will be?
right. Yeah.
Whereas here, there is not one other believer on our street. And that's common.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't expecting that there would
Sure.
be. But it's funny how after a week, one of the neighbors came down and their comment was like, so we obviously you guys are like religious. And like, so they're kind of, it makes
Yeah.
people uncomfortable. They're not really
Right.
sure what that means. So I hear you talking about Texas, and I'm like, even your description of going to Baylor, going to college was like an easy to live your faith.
Hmm.
I don't think I've ever heard those words spoken of anyone going to
Well,
college around here.
yeah, yeah. And let me say though, like it was very much I'd say it was easy, but I have a friend that was recently, praying about where to plant a church. He was a church planter, young pastor, and he was talking about going to Waco, and surprised me at first because I thought there are a lot of churches in Waco, like a whole lot of churches. And his comment to me was, "Are you kidding?" He was like, "A lot of people that think they love Jesus and they have no idea." And I thought that was absolutely my background. I
Hmm.
had I grew up knowing a lot about who Jesus was. I knew a lot about what the Bible said, but I don't know that I really had a relationship with Jesus. And so I think that that's the same when you talk about Baylor. It's just a cultural
Yeah.
thing and not so much like I don't know that you know a lot of students are actually walking with Jesus,
Yeah.
so it is different.
Let's go ahead and jump to obviously you've been married for a number of years now. So there's quite a number of years from when you came back from Australia
Hmm.
to today. But what were maybe some things in that journey through those years that have been really God? I love how you described it, like drawing you into really an intimate relationship with Him. But what are maybe some moments along the way that you just, whether they were experiences or seasons, that you're like, this was something that God really used to grow my
Hmm.
faith and definitely draw me in to a closer relationship with Him?
Yeah, a few things come to mind. One was before I met my husband, even, I was in a relationship with a guy that was totally toxic. And I knew it. Like, I absolutely knew it. I was walking with Jesus. I was faithfully pursuing community, biblical community, discipleship, mentoring, was really involved in my church, and still in this relationship that I knew was totally wrong for me. Again, growing up in the Bible Belt, which I know, this might sound so crazy to you, but for whatever reason, I had put having sex before I was married like as the ultimate
Hmm.
cannot, will not do. I was like 25, 24, 25, found myself in this relationship that I knew was absolutely wrong with me. He was from out of state and came to visit one time, and I was at a restaurant with him, and I even texted my sister while he was in the restroom, and I said I can't wait for him to leave. I just knew it was so bad. And that same night I gave him my virginity,
Hmm.
and it wrecked me, Bethany. Like it wrecked me
Hmm.
because now I know, however many years later, like sin is all sin, and I mean it's all equally offensive to a holy God. For whatever reason, to me, I had put it in a different sort of category, and so the shame that just fell on me was thick,
Hmm.
so thick, and because it was so shameful, I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to about it. I didn't. I confessed very early on to a couple people, and it was just out of like sheer desperation of
Hmm.
like I've got to get this off my chest. I need somebody to tell me I'm okay, that I'm going to make it, but it was really, really difficult. I spent days in bed, like just not being able to move. And of course the fear of like, what if I had gotten pregnant and all of
Mm.
those things that come along with it. And so I think that experience, even though that night was one of the darkest of my life, because I willingly walked into sin and disobedience and rebellion, looking back, I see now that that was one of the times that I felt like I was at so rock bottom that I realized how desperately I needed a savior.
Hmm.
Even though I had had a savior for many years before
Yeah.
that, I hadn't really felt that need as desperately as I did then. I hadn't really come face to face with how capable my flesh was of the most heinous of things. And of course, like I said, it's all equally offensive to God. And so I didn't view my gossip. I didn't view the way that my relationship with food, those types of things. I didn't view those things as equally as offensive. And so coming face to face with how desperate I was for God was hard, like really, really hard. But ultimately, I look back and go, that was one of the sweetest times for me to feel how desperate I needed Him and how close He was, and that I wasn't beyond repair, and this was later, a few years later after I met my husband and had to confess all of this and other things, obviously, to him. I just remember this idea that I felt so broken and damaged, and God used him also to remind me that yes, we're all broken and we're all damaged, but we're
Mm.
all equal at the feet of Christ.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was a low moment at the time, but looking back, I think, gosh, I'm really grateful
Mm.
for, I wish it would have been different. I wish I could have learned that lesson a different way, but God used it as kind of a turning point in my relationship with Him.
I appreciate you sharing that story for so many reasons, but you're talking to something that I have really wrestled and I'm sitting here thinking we're probably around the same age. And I do
Um,
feel like we come from a generation, at least in Christian circles, even though I was raised in New England and you were, what is it?
yeah,
The buckle of the Bible Belt in
yeah, yeah,
Texas.
exactly.
Like
Yeah,
I definitely grew up with that same pressure seems like a terrible word, but I grew up in the true love waits generation where we
sure.
we got a ring at an age, and that ring was this, kind of representation that we're going to save ourselves till marriage. And
Yeah,
man, did I struggle with just not understanding purity and holiness and getting very confused in that season of life of basically for me where virginity and purity were interchangeable and
hmm,
really not because I do think that God is absolutely in his word called us like he has it's not a gray area where he said I've designed sex for within a marriage relationship,
right.
but never did I understand the beauty of that or like the call that God was like, no, I've designed something beautiful. It was always this almost forbidden fruit that was somehow worse than the others. Like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
this is the unforgivable. I remember watching videos where they gave these terrible threats about if you do this, like these are the diseases you're going to have
right,
and
right.
it's going to be awful. And those all of that kind of really became slowly started to unravel as I had friends that stepped outside of those bounds and was like, because really the message was like, sex outside of marriage is bad, sex
Yeah,
inside of marriage is good. So
right,
don't do it when it's bad. And then my friends are like, actually, so I tried it and turns out it was good.
right,
And I
right.
was like,
That's so
wait,
confusing. Yeah,
yeah, like, hold
yeah,
on, it's supposed to be bad.
right.
And I feel like it took years of God really in his grace and mercy walking me through and ultimately coming to this place of understanding that there are women, young women, whatever, walking through life that do not still hold on to their virgin are not married but do not have their virginity that are
Hmm,
walking and choosing a life of purity and holiness before God and
hmm,
are forgiven and
hmm,
redeemed. But equally so, there are women who maintain their virginity that are not walking
Right.
really with a heart
Totally.
of purity and holiness. So like understanding that those things are not the same. And
Yeah.
I just think your story, that's a beautiful reminder that even though for you that may have felt like the darkest, as you said, a
Yeah.
low time, that maybe that's the place that God was like, no, I need to meet you here. So you know that I'm not just in your perceived righteousness, like
Yeah.
what is it? Our righteousness, the best we have to offer is filthy rags. Like
Right.
that's what
Right.
scripture says.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like we're doing better at it, but I still feel like we don't talk about this enough, especially for
Right.
young women who are before marriage, who are fighting these same things that I remember wrestling with,
Right.
and need this message of, yes, God has called you to holiness and purity, but it's not just this, this is good, this is bad. Like
Right.
there's something beautiful in this that he's inviting you into. And
Yeah.
his grace is sufficient overall. Like it's not a line in the sand that once you cross, you can't get back.
Right. Right. I think that's so good. And it's something that I think struggle with even with parenting. And of course, we're not quite there. I mean, we talk about these things at their age level right now, but I think about so much of little kid parenting is behavior modification, right? That we're
Mm,
just trying to get the behaviors right. And and at some point, and maybe it should always be like this, but at some point, and we're starting to get there now with my 9-year-old for sure, and my 7-year-old uh, at times, is talking less about the behavior and more about the heart
mm,
motivation, right? And that's what God is most concerned about, is that our behaviors are flowing from as an overflow of what's happening in our hearts. So I think it's just that's different than the way that I feel like I was raised with that, not necessarily from my parents, but just culturally what was taught was exactly like what you're saying, that it belongs here, not here, versus like what what is God saying about where our hearts should be and how our hearts should view holiness. And so the same thing goes with what we're talking about with purity, is how I was raised, not necessarily by my parents, but just as a culture, was this is wrong, this is right. And there was very little talk about the why that God has
yeah.
called us to holiness. There's something going on in our heart, not just about what's coming out, because the coming out is coming from what's an overflow of our hearts. So
Oh yeah.
I think it's just it wasn't taught that way to me, and now I feel like I have an uphill battle of how do I do that well with my own kids.
Hmm.
And knowing too, I mean, I kind of wonder if this is true for you, that some of the most pivotal moments of my walk with Jesus have come from really dark spots. And
Yes.
so I don't want I hope that my kids walk in purity and holiness and righteousness. I hope that they don't have seasons of real darkness. And at the same time, I'm 38, and I think those were hard times, and those were
Mm.
dark times that I, I wish would have gone differently. And yet, had it not been for those times, I don't know if I would know Jesus the way that I do now, because without those times.
Oh
So
yeah.
I don't want to
No.
rob my kids of of falling on their knees, of scraping their knees and getting to learn more about Jesus is because they've fallen.
And that's such a good reminder, I think, for all of us who are parents, or even like mentors, aunts, whatever, even
Hmm.
friends, that hopefully none of us wants to watch suffering and other people, but to
Right.
remember how often in our own lives that that's where God has done some of the deepest and the greatest work, has been through our suffering.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I don't want to think about that as a mom.
No. No. Well, and you don't want to pray for that either. Like, so I think the other thing that, as far as like seasons that have taught me more about who Jesus is, most recently, 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with a heart condition.
Hmm.
Um, that just kind of came out of nowhere. I was, for about 14 years prior to that, had been a pretty serious runner. I had run 16 marathons, and that was just kind of my rhythm, was just, I ran a lot.
Hmm.
And prior to that, prior to October of 2017, I started to, when I would run, have these strange heart palpitations, and my heart would race. Sent me to a cardiologist, and they put a monitor on me and did a lot of testing. Basically left the doctors and his team pretty baffled by my case. But after a lot of testing, they determined, at least preliminarily, that I was at a high risk for sudden cardiac death.
Oh, wow.
And so I lived for about 2 months that way, like that I
Hmm.
could just die at any moment, which is a huge wake up call, right?
Yeah.
And obviously it changes everything. It changes the way that you live and the way that you parent, and the way that you just view the world around you. And long story short, after a couple months of my doctor talking with other doctors around the country and getting some peer reviews and things like that, they thought that they could determine where this arrhythmia was coming from, and it was in the outflow tracts of my heart. And so they went in December 8th of 2017 for a surgery. After that, about a 5-hour surgery, I woke up and my doctor said that he thought it was curative.
Wow.
That he was previously in other kind of minor surgeries, he was previously able to induce the arrhythmia.
Hmm.
And then after he did this on December 8th, he wasn't able to induce the arrhythmia anymore. So it led him to believe that it was curative. Praise God. We just didn't have any expectation that that was
Oh,
what
yeah.
was going to happen. And so, but living like that for a couple months, that has changed me as well, and has drawn me a lot closer to God in that he could have taken me home. I
Hmm.
mean, and that's what we thought. I remember in November of that year, we were taking family photos. I still get choked up thinking about it, but I just remember getting those photos back from our photographer and wondering if they were our last family
Hmm.
photos. And I think, we weren't sure what God was going to do, if he was going to heal me then, or we believe that he's always going to heal.
Yeah.
It might happen when we see him face to face, but we just weren't quite sure of his timing on that. And so living like that, and then God choosing in his kindness to heal me, has left me kind of just trusting more. I think that I have purpose here, that
Hmm.
I heard Catherine Wolfe say one time, that if you have a pulse, you have a purpose. And I
Yes.
love that. Oh, I love that
Yes.
so much, because sometimes as a stay-at-home mom, you kind of look around the house and you're like, what am I doing here? What is this really all that I have? But it's been so sweet of God to kind of give me that wake up call, that brush
Hmm.
with eternity, of that I'm and how brief this life is, and I don't want to waste it. And so I would say those two experiences, with some others, scattered in between, have been some of the pivotal moments of my adult life walking with Jesus.
Well, those two would be enough to shake your world.
Yeah.
so, I've heard stories before and kind of gotten to talk with friends who have walked through something when it's truly like you're facing life or death, which really there's not a whole lot in life that compares to when you're legitimately like, okay, this could very much be the end. And for you, not only to have faced that, but to have walked that for 2 months. So really, really sitting in it. You said obviously that was a pivotal thing. Is there anything for you that you're like, this was something, maybe it was even just a practical way that you lived your everyday that was one way before those 2 months, and that you're like, this has to change moving forward? Do you feel like there was any of those because I mean, I ask myself, I'm sure other people do, if I really came face to face with that, what would that do to change my everyday, like my daily choices, decisions?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good question. I will say, I feel like my life looked really different during that unknown period.
Mm,
I feel like I was more patient. I felt like my kids didn't irritate me like they can now. I wouldn't lose my temper, those types of things. I just didn't get worked up over as
mm,
many things as I maybe normally would, as my normal temperament would be. I'm sad to say though, Bethany, that this, our hearts are so prone to wander.
mm,
And it's I thought that I would, walking through that. Now, I will say I have changed. I believe that, but I remember walking through that and going, my life will never be the
mm,
same. And 2 years later, I lose my temper just like I did 2 years ago. I
mm.
get frustrated, those types of things. It's it's crazy how quickly our hearts kind of revert back to our old flesh, and forget the how finite our lives are. We just forget that God's been gracious enough to remind me. I have an implanted monitor in my chest right now, and that's just for my doctor to keep an eye on me all the time for at least 3 years, and then we kind of go from there. Um, so it is a physical reminder
Hmm.
that of what I had been through, what God saved me from. I feel it. I can touch it. It's a reminder that God is the one that is ordering every single heartbeat, that without the power of his word, that at any moment I'm gone. I don't think I really gave you probably the answer that you wanted, because it's there's
No,
not.
I actually think the answer you gave, because we all ask ourselves the question. And I think everyone wants to think that if I walk through that,
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
would change. But I appreciate so much your honesty and just being vulnerable and saying, you've, I did in the moment feel that way, but then the truth of it is that a lot of things feel like they kind of slid back into what it was
yeah.
before. And I think that you use the line prone to wander. I put that in my journal so frequently, like
Yeah,
for that hymn, because I think it's so true. I also think that it's such an example of God's grace and mercy and kindness, that we are so prone to wander, that we are the Israelites in the Old Testament again and again and again. Like
yeah,
we have these monumental experiences with God, and we're like, mind blown. And
yeah.
then in our human flesh, we just like right back to, was it Israel? One day God provides, the next day they're complaining. Like
Right, right.
each and every
Yeah,
one of us kind of have that, but God, like, isn't that
yeah.
the whole Ephesians 2, that
Right.
God in his mercy is continuing to walk with you? He's not like, Amanda, gosh, come on. Like, what more do I
Right.
have to do? He's just
Right.
like every single day showing up. And like you said, you literally have a physical reminder that he is sustaining your
Mhm.
breath, that you do have a
Mhm.
pulse there for a purpose.
Yeah.
And that even in what you might feel like are the worst of moments of whatever, losing your temper, being annoyed with
Mhm.
kids, that God is continuing to just lead you and guide you and work through your story, through your life. So all that to say, I think your answer is exactly what we need to hear, because I
Oh,
think,
good.
well, I just think there's so many of us that are like, okay, I'm not
Yeah.
alone. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
not just my
No, that's
heart that's
good.
prone to wander over here. Like,
Right.
because
Yeah.
it's true. And
Yeah.
really, that's what, hey girl, we're talking about running our race in our place. But ultimately, this isn't to point to us in our goodness and look how awesome I'm doing. It's to
Yeah.
point to a God that in his grace and mercy has invited us into his story, his race, the journey that he's accomplishing, and we just get to be a part of it.
Yeah.
in our broken, messed up ways. We
Yeah.
get to be a part
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
So tell me then, this stage of life, you've got three boys. You're a boy mom. What?
Hashtag boy mom. Yep. Yep.
Yes. What does just everyday, I don't even mean like the exciting big, but just everyday faithfulness look like for you right now?
I think right now I'm in a little bit of a weird spot in life. I've been busy with various projects for the past few years, and things are kind of at a crossroads, like where I'm going to have, well, and my youngest is going to kindergarten next year. So I've still got a year, but in my mind I'm thinking, what's going to happen then?
Hmm.
And so I'm feel like I'm trying to like get things in place so that I know what to do with my life in August of next year. I always like thinking maybe a few too many steps ahead. But so faithfulness right now, I think I feel like God's pushing me more and more to slow down.
Hmm.
And because that's my tendency, is to be thinking about August next year and what's going to happen then and where am I going to find my identity then. And what's uncomfortable is just being faithful with today and the moment. And so that's really what I'm having to like really wrestle with right now. It feels so simple. It feels like such a lesson I could have learned 15 years ago. But it's been really hard for me. How do I be faithful right here with my current circumstances, the current situation around here, where our kids are, what God has given me to steward well, being faithful. Right now, I'm about to start next week, actually teaching a 6-week class on the book of James, which I'm super excited about. Being faithful in preparation for that, and at the same time, like I don't know how you do this with your preparation for things that you teach on or speak at, but it's always a balance, I think, of how do I spend time in the Word for preparation versus like
Yes.
just spending time with Jesus.
Hmm.
Kind of trying to figure out that right now. So I think God's just calling me to like slow down a little bit, and I feel what's hard for me is I'm just like feel a little off balance without a lot of things on my plate.
Hmm.
So without a lot of things, I try to fill my plate with more stuff, and that's not what God's calling me to right now. I just know that I've been saying no quite a bit lately, and that's also a little weird for me, but good. It's all very
Yeah.
good. It's good. It feels freeing to say no, but yeah, I think that's what faithfulness is looking like for me right now, is being faithful in the moment, trusting God with my current circumstances and slowing down a little bit.
I think too, we were just saying at the beginning, you being a 3, which is for people who don't know Enneagram, like that achiever mentality, when you're someone who is wired to get things done and to accomplish, and that place of just being it's extremely challenging. I think all of us have those things that are healthy places for us to be that feel so unnatural.
Yeah.
It's so, for me as like the silver lining girl, like for me, sitting in sadness or things that are hard and feeling my feelings is so
Yeah.
hard for me.
Right.
Like I'm like, no, we can fix this.
Yes.
And so no, I think one, it makes sense that it's totally a challenge, but I think too, for listeners to be encouraged who are also kind of in that place of wrestling, and you're describing I still marker it as one of the biggest transitions I remember in my life is when my youngest went to school.
Yeah.
And I think that is another one of those kind of monumental, because you've done one thing for all that time and just,
Right.
it changes. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, though I think it's beautiful the trying to kind of sit where you are. I feel like I literally could feel it in my heart. I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
that, like, oh my goodness, now what? Like
Right.
it's all
Yeah.
something different. And so,
Yeah.
oh well, Let me ask you, I know this was kind of towards the beginning, but I'm just thinking as we get ready to wrap up,
Hmm.
I'm sure that there have been people who have listened who they may be walking through a similar struggle that you mentioned earlier in terms of whether it's sex before marriage or
Hmm.
something that they've either made a decision, a choice in their life that they're wrestling with that feeling of whether it's feeling like it's unforgivable, whether it's feeling like
Hmm.
I can't come back from this. Like
Hmm.
I've crossed a line that we've kind of created in our own minds. Is there anything you'd want to say to that listener or that younger version of you to encourage
Hmm.
them with all that you know now of God's goodness and his grace and his mercy? If you could sit with them right now, what would you want to say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a nutshell, I would say we're never too far from the grace of God. We're never too bad beyond the reach of God's grace,
Mm,
and that's probably what I needed to hear in my darkest moments. I think what I struggled with probably most during that season of sin and disobedience was that I was walking with Jesus, and so I had such a hard time reconciling if I actually was a believer, like how, if I was really walking with Jesus, and how could I find myself in a circumstance like that?
mm,
And what I know now is that God is 100% sovereign over everything in my life, everything in the life of a believer, and so even my darkest moments are being used for my perseverance. And I
mm,
see that clearly now because I see that I know Jesus better because of it.
mm,
But in the moment, it does not feel like that. My circumstances, and whether that's a season of disobedience or it's a season of suffering, I believe that God is completely sovereign, that given circumstance is plan A.
mm.
And that's what is really uncomfortable. Like my heart, walking through my heart issues. I'm talking about my physical heart. It's hard to believe that a good God would let his kids suffer in that way. What I feel like I know now is that he's using every single minute of every single circumstance for our perseverance, for our good, and for his glory.
Mm.
And because of that, I can trust that it's doing something, that it's accomplishing something in my life. And like James, the book of James says that we can count it all joy because we know that the testing of our faith is developing steadfastness, and steadfastness must finish its work so that we might be perfect and complete. And that
Mm.
doesn't, when you're walking through suffering, it feels impossible to call it joy,
Hmm.
right? But somehow, because of the Holy Spirit, we can, because we know that it's doing something for us and it's not meaningless, that it's always on purpose.
I think your life is a testament of this, but just the beauty in that message that God is a God of redemption and he doesn't
Mm-hmm.
waste. And when we can put things, kind of surrender those things into his hands and watch what he's can do and just kind of realize that there's so much of the picture that we can't see.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I love about hearing people's stories is we get that kind of benefit of hindsight and looking back and being like, wow, look at what God has done
Yeah.
through the good, through the hard. And so again, I so appreciate your willingness to share your story, but also I'm excited for people to hear and just be encouraged. And for those listeners that really connect with the things that you walked through, for them to just remember that in their own lives, that God is a God of redemption and he's not going to
Yeah.
waste any of these things.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being on the podcast
Yeah.
today. I'm glad that we were able to make this thing rock out.
Me too. Me too. Finally, long time coming.
Oh, well, I appreciate having you as a guest. Thank you for
Thank you.
sticking with all our audio, and we had to get through all the hiccups, but what
Yeah.
fun is it unless there's a
Right.
few? A few things to trip over.
That's right. Thank you so much, Bethany. It's so fun.
What a great episode with Amanda. I hope you enjoyed that. Do us a favor, reach out, let us know what were the things that stood out. How did God use Amanda's story to speak to you specifically? I want to share a couple of things just so you don't miss them, okay? First, you can find Amanda on Instagram at Amanda K. Brown. But here's what you need to know, and we didn't talk about this in the episode, but y'all, she has an Etsy store that she has the cutest Christmas stockings that she's selling right now. I mean, absolutely adorable. So go follow her on Instagram. Go check out her Etsy store. Definitely buy some gifts, some stockings, whatever it is. They're perfect and I love them. So, as usual, this week, we are praying, hoping that this was another story just to encourage you in your week. We love hearing from you. I know I'm like a broken record saying this, but I am not exaggerating when I say all of the messages that come in when you take just a few moments to share with us, like, hey, this is how God used that story. Like, this is how he spoke to my heart. It's almost like being the cheer squad for Hey Girl. Like, it encourages us in what we're doing. It reminds us of why we do what we do. And it gives us a chance to pass that on to these women and men, I guess, who are sharing their stories, because it's a big deal for them to get on here and tell about their lives and be vulnerable and open when they don't know everyone that's listening. So I think it's such an amazing thing to be able to turn back and be like, listen, let me share this message of how God used your honesty and your vulnerability to encourage somebody else in their journey. So, listeners, girls, guys, dogs, cats, I don't know who's listening. Do me a favor, take some time, send us a message, let us know. Better yet, while you're at it, leave a review, because I've mentioned it before, but that's what helps Hey Girl grow in terms of being able to reach and share these stories with more people. So I cannot wait to hear from you. I will definitely continue sharing your messages, your reviews, and I hope this week, wherever God has you, whatever the place, that you will continue to be faithful, running your race in your place, and know that I am cheering you on.